Okay, and again, welcome to the SOMAH interview workshop. This is the first of our 2021 career development series where we're going to be having quite a few workshops throughout the year, particularly aimed at solar job seekers. And again, my name is Stacy Hoyle. I'm with the SOMAH program. We also have Daryl Lambert from Rising Sun Center for Opportunity, Luis Amar from the SOMAH program, Zara Jamshed from the SOMAH program, and Daisy Meyer, also from SOMAH. And you'll get to see them present throughout today's presentation. Next slide, please. All right, so if you don't already know or aren't familiar with the SOMAH program, it stands for Solar on Multifamily Affordable Housing, and it is a California statewide program that provides financial incentives to install solar photovoltaic systems on multifamily affordable housing properties throughout California. And with every program funded installation, there's paid job training opportunities, and job trainees can get experience in PV installation, system design, and engineering, and commissioning and maintenance roles, any type of role throughout the installation of the system. Also, tenants of SOMAH properties and students and recent graduates of certain solar or green building construction job training programs are eligible for these opportunities. And eligible trainees can sign up to participate by signing up for the SOMAH job training portal, where you can upload your resume, you can search for open positions, and you can also search for job training programs if you want to enroll in one of those. Any questions about SOMAH's job training opportunities, feel free to email us at workforce@calsomah.org. Next slide. All right, so a little breakdown for today's workshop. We, of course, have the presentation portion first, and that's going to take us through 11 a.m. Pacific. And then immediately following the presentation, we do have an option. It's totally optional if you want to stick around for the mock interview. And this is going to be where participants can get matched up with a volunteer career coach, and you're going to be able to practice your interviewing skills. We have a certain list of questions, and so you can make up a job that you're looking for. Maybe you already have a job in mind, but you'll get the opportunity to practice and get some feedback. And then if you aren't able to stick around for that mock interview session, we do have another option for the mock interview session next Tuesday, March 16th from 1 to 2:30 p.m. And I will say we had quite a few folks sign up last minute for today's presentation. So if you're able to stick around for the mock interview today, just please chat it in the box, or you can chat me directly so I make sure we have space for you and we have a volunteer for you. Upcoming, like I said, these are quarterly career development events. We have a negotiation workshop in May on May 6th, and so stay tuned for more details on that. Next slide. All right, so just a little bit about Zoom. You can ask questions at any point during the presentation by just chatting it into the chat box. If you hover down below, you can see a little chat icon, and you can type anything in, either directly to myself, to any of the presenters, or to everyone. And then we will have a certain section at the very end of the presentation where you can ask questions out loud if you want to take yourself off mute. Otherwise, we have a couple of poll questions that we're hoping everyone can participate in. Those will just automatically pop up on your Zoom screen, and you can just click on the answer. Next slide. All right, so here I'm presenting or introducing you to a couple of our presenters today. We have Zara Jamshed. Zara, do you want to say hello?
Hi everyone, my name is Zara. I use they, them pronouns. I am a technical specialist with the SOMAH team based in Oakland, and I will be playing the role of the job seeker.
All right, we also have Luis Amar from the SOMAH team. Morning, Luis.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Luis Amar. My pronouns are he, him. I am also a SOMAH technical specialist, and I'm going to be the interviewer today.
All right, next slide. We also have Daisy Meyer on the SOMAH team. Hi, Daisy.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Daisy Meyer. I use she, her pronouns, and I am going to be walking you through some best practices for interviewing tips today.
And last but not least, we have Daryl Lambert from our partner organization, Rising Sun Center for Opportunity. Hey,
Morning,
Daryl.
everybody. My name's Daryl. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm going to be filling out a few bits of information here. And I work with a summer program in terms of workforce engagement. So you might be hearing from me when you are ready to apply for a position.
All right. Taking us to the next slide, I think I'm going to hand it over to you, Daryl.
Great. Good morning, everybody. So really quickly, just to walk through the purpose of today's workshop, we're going to walk you through the steps that you need to be aware of to prepare yourself for an interview, provide you with some key tips for how to show up professionally for an interview and ace that interview. We're going to give you some examples of how to form answers in response to questions that you're going to receive during in an interview. And then we're actually going to jump right in. I hope this is what you came for. Jump right into doing some practice interviews where you're going to get a chance to pair up with a volunteer and answer some live questions and get some coaching if you would like, and if you're open to that. So we have a jam-packed day. We're going to structure today sort of following the process that you would have as you are preparing for an interview, going through the interview, and then how you follow up. So we're going to start off with going through the phase of what you do before the interview to get yourself prepared. Then we're going to pivot to what you do during the interview to be successful and ace that interview. And then what to do after to really hammer it home. And then we'll jump into the mock interviews and practice. But before we get started, we're going to launch a quick poll question. You should see it just pop up on your screen. Stacy?
So it looks like I'm still unable to see poll questions, but we can pivot and type the question in the chat box and everyone can chat in their answer. So everyone's chatting in. Thanks y'all for participating. The question is, how confident do you feel with your interviewing skills? Very confident, somewhat confident, or not confident?
So this is good. This is good. We're seeing a handful of very confident. We're seeing, a lot of somewhat confident. So that means everybody's here for the right place. We're in the right place here to get everybody up to that level where at least we're closer to being very confident or very, very confident or even somewhat very confident. So that's hopefully what we'll achieve as we go through today. So we're going to jump right into the first portion, which is getting you ready to ace your interview. So before we do that, though, we just want to touch base really quickly on some of the different types of interviews that you might experience. We're going to be covering one-on-one interviewing during this workshop, although we may have some panel interviews set up, given that we have so many wonderful folks here today, and we want to make sure they have everybody paired up and have an opportunity to practice. So you might get we'll talk about panel interviews in a second. Here's a few different types of interviews that you should be aware of. First of all, there's the initial phone screen. This is when the employer maybe reaches out to you ahead of time to check in on a couple different things, a couple key qualifications, making sure you have availability. It's often the first step of an interview, but it doesn't always happen. And it's just a quick phone conversation. So that's why it's actually extremely important to always have a professional voicemail and an up-to-date phone number in your application. So that's on your resume and in any forms that you submit as part of the application to make sure that they can get a hold of you. And starting off on the right foot, something we don't often think about in terms of the voicemail, but it could be somebody's first impression of us. So make sure that it's set up to really make that first impression. An in-person interview is when you actually arrive at an office, and typically there's a desk between you, and it's you one-on-one with an interview, or a group interview in which it's you and other candidates going for the same position, interviewing one interviewer. Then there's also something called a panel interview, where it can be you as the person being interviewed with multiple interviewers from the same organization. Some of you may have the opportunity to experience a panel interview today, which does happen quite frequently in the professional world, so it's good to have that practice. But some of you will also be doing one-on-one interviews as well. Some interviews may be in person, as I mentioned, but also more common these days are virtual interviews. And that's an interview that takes place over either the phone or a computer or an app, like Zoom. And that's when you're communicating through the Zoom app via computer or phone. So something to be aware of, and that's actually what we're going to be practicing today. So that's good to keep in mind. Before the interview is what we're going to start off with. That's where we're talking about the steps that you need to go through to prepare. We just really quickly want to mention, I don't know that we have time to go through this right now, but we did want to mention that we recently interviewed the CEO of O&M Services, Kenneth Wells, on the importance of interview preparation. What we're going to do is share this video out with everybody that's on this webinar so you can watch it on your own time. But it's good to hear somebody talk about this who's gone through it and share some of their reflections and insights into how to get into the industry and interview for these positions.
Actually, I think that we have a little bit of time, Daryl, if you want to play Kenneth's reflections. I think that it's a helpful note, and it's part of what sparked us creating this workshop. We were chatting with Kenneth, and he was talking about one of the biggest barriers to even getting a job is just being able to get through that interview process, and how he even skipped over hiring people when he was at another company because of their interview skills that he then later on hired in his own company. And so just a quick 2-minute clip to talk about why it is so important to not just practice interviewing, but really prepare for the interviews that you're showing up for.
Great. So we'll go ahead and play that video. So it's about 2 minutes long. So settle in and listen to Kenneth Wells share some of his insights. Let's start that over.
One of the barriers that's very important is interviewing. It's in a lot of sense, it is a barrier. It's a screening process for employers. They try to sort through in 30 minutes, maybe 45 minutes, candidates to see who's the best and who they should and shouldn't hire. They have their approaches to it. Some approaches are very aggressive in trying to weed out people. So they come with these technical questions. They come with very hard, intimidating processes that can make a person fumble. I mean, I was a part of, that process. I would go through this interviewing process with people, and they would get intimidated that they couldn't even answer a simple question, because at a certain point you're just like, spending time, finding somewhere they have, a lot of these employment departments, they have, or someone to do that face-to-face interviews. Training for how, when you go through an interview is very important, because you can be a very good candidate. And I'll be honest, there's candidates that I hired for my company today that when I was working for another company, I didn't hire because they couldn't pass the interview process, but I wish I would have hired them at that time, because they're very good people. So being able to do good interviewing is very important to the success of any individual, if they're going to continue to, especially when you get into more key positions. So I think that's a barrier that I had to learn and be groomed through. And I would suggest to anybody that, if you're interested in growing, being able to be a good interviewer is very important. That's like number one thing I could think of. Obviously.
So thanks for showing that, Daryl. Kenneth Wells is actually somebody that went through a job training program, worked his way up through being a solar installer, a lead installer, and eventually became the CEO of his own company. So it was a great opportunity to be able to do an informational interview with him. If you're interested, there is the full recording of that informational interview on SOMAH's YouTube site, and we could link to that later on and in the resources as well. But it really stuck with us of saying, like, there are people that have really great qualifications and would be great in the solar industry, or really at many of their jobs, but they can't talk about their experience in a way that resonates with employers. So throughout this, we're going to walk you through a little bit of what it looks like. We are going to do something that's a little unique, a little bit for workshops, and we're actually going to walk you through with a role play. You met Luis and Zara a little bit earlier, and they're going to be acting as an employer and an employee, just to give you a little bit more of a mindset of how would this look like for me from start to finish, even from the very first email that an employer sends you saying, hey, we would like to welcome you in for an interview. What does it look like to be that person going through this process? So go ahead and go to the next slide. So to let you see what it actually looks like to prepare, we're going to follow the mock scenario of Zara's interview journey. Hi, Zara. And so while this is pretend, Zara does work for SOMAH and is not actually going through an interview process. And this is a pretend solar company. We've tried to capture the key moments in the interview process that you may experience in your real life scenario. So we're entering into this scenario when Zara has been offered an interview from one of the companies that they had applied to. We'll call it Sun or Solar. And they applied for this a couple of weeks ago and just got an email. So let's start off just by meeting Zara as our interviewee.
Hi, I'm Zara. Over the past few weeks, I've applied to several solar installer positions using the resume and cover letter templates that I got from SOMAH. I'm excited because I was just offered an interview, and we're going to walk through my interview process, starting with the email that Sun or Solar sent me and how I prepare for the interview.
Thanks, Zara. So as Zara mentioned, we wanted to share the email that they received from Sun or Solar. So let's actually introduce you to the other side of this equation, the employer, Luis. And Luis is acting as the hiring manager who sent the email.
My name is Luis, and I'm acting as the employer that has decided to interview Zara. This is the email sent to Zara offering them an interview. Dear Zara, thank you for applying for the solar installer position at Sun or Solar. I would like to offer you an interview. Does tomorrow from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. work? We're moving quickly with this process, so we appreciate a prompt response. If that time works, we will send you a link for the interview. We look forward to talking to you soon. Best, Luis Amar.
Thanks, Luis. So while we often really do want multiple options for interview times and a little bit more time in advance, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes an employer is trying to go quickly, like in this scenario, and they're like, hey, can you chat tomorrow? And so we did this as an expedited version, so you can see that you can do a lot of preparation in a short amount of time. So sometimes you can see in this example, companies have to do this quickly. And while we do want more than one day to prepare, we're going to give you an example of how to prepare even if you only have that one day. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So in order for this preparation to happen and to be strategic about Zara's next steps, based on this email that Luis sent, there are a few key pieces of information that Zara and any of you who are offered an interview at any time want to make sure that you know before you're moving forward and take note of. So a couple of things that you want to make sure that you jot down somewhere that you can find is making sure you write down who's going to be your interviewer and who is the company and the hiring managers. Hopefully you're going to be offered a bunch of different interviews once you start your application process. And so you want to make sure that you have some sort of organization and you know who you're going to be talking to so you don't mix up who you're talking to or what the company is. That can feel a little bit embarrassing. And you also want to make sure that you are using their name and you get familiar with them. You're also going to make sure, for a similar reason, that you write down the specific job title that is for this interview. Sometimes job titles can be similar but different. Make sure you write down the specific job title for the interview that you have been offered. You also want to take note of when and where the interview is and what the call-in link is. And if you didn't get that from an initial interview or from the initial email, you're going to want to make sure that you ask in your follow-up email. And then you also are going to want to make a copy of the job description. I don't know if any of you have experienced this before. You apply for your dream job, you get the interview, and then all of a sudden you can't find that job description anymore. It's not posted and you can't reference it. So it's always nice to be able to make a copy of that job description so that you can reference it in the future. Even after you receive the job, it's nice to have a copy of that job description so you can look back and be like, okay, well, is this actually what I was told that I was going to be doing? So Zara has noted that they have an interview with Luis Amar at Center Solar for a solar installer position on Zoom tomorrow at 10 a.m. and it's going to be for an hour. So let's see how they go through this process and how they respond to the email that Luis sent.
I wanted to make sure to respond promptly to Luis, so I emailed him back once I checked my schedule and knew that I was available. I made sure to show in my email that I have experience, I'm excited to learn more, and that I am available at that 10 a.m. time slot. I also am continuing to monitor my email later in the day for Luis's response so that I can have the call-in link. Here's what I wrote. Hi, Luis. 10 a.m. tomorrow works great. I'm really looking forward to sharing more about my experience with construction and solar and to learn more about Center Solar and the installation position. I'll look for the meeting link for the interview with your confirmation. Thank you, Zara. And so now that I've confirmed my availability, like Daisy said, I screenshotted the job description so I can reference it while I'm preparing. I added the interview time to my calendar, so less likely to miss it. I have decided to download Zoom onto my phone because I hear if you use a phone on Zoom, it works better through the app. And I don't know if I'm going to have access to a computer or not.
You're on mute, Daisy.
I'll just talk to myself over here. Thanks, Zara. So notice how Zara added this to their calendar, which is a super important step. You want to make sure that you're on time. Early is on time is late, and late is unacceptable. And sometimes people even miss interviews because they didn't jot it down in their calendar. I know that my calendar is my external brain. If it's not on my calendar, I miss it. So in the chat box, please write down what type of calendar do you use most frequently? Do you use a paper calendar like a planner? Do you use your phone with the calendar? Or do you have a specific app like Google Calendar, Outlook Calendar? Go ahead and put it in the chat box what you currently use for your calendar. And as you're doing that, just note that another reason that I love putting things like this in the calendar is you can know all of the specifics, like the ones that Zara had been writing down, like who the interviewer is, where the meeting time and place are, and even paste in the job description into your calendar as well. And so there's a lot of information you can put directly in that calendar. So when it comes time for your actual interview, you can view that immediately right there. So I see that some people are putting in digital, paper, Google and Apple Calendar, Google Calendar. I have Google Calendar. Without Google Calendar, I'm lost. All right. Go ahead and go to the next slide.
All right. So once you have the basic information about the interview, you're ready to start preparing for the interview. The first thing you should do is research the company. And this is because you'll really stand out if you show that you're invested and interested in learning about the company, as well as the person that you'll be meeting with. When Zara starts preparing for the interview, they can have an edge by knowing more about the company, more about the job, and more about the person that will be interviewing them. Let's go ahead and take a look at how Zara tracks down this information.
I only have a day to prepare. I started my research right after Luis emailed me. I emailed Luis back. Next, I Googled the company's webpage and read through the information on their homepage. And I made sure to write down the mission statement. I've heard that people are often asked what part of the company's mission resonated with them. So I want to be able to talk about what the mission is. Center Solar's mission is to reduce carbon emissions by increasing the amount of solar PV installed. So I'm going to look up more information on carbon emissions since it must be very important to them. Lastly, I looked up the person that will be interviewing me, Luis Amar. I found his bio and LinkedIn page. Interestingly, in his bio, it mentions that he was an industrial designer. I'll want to ask him about how that translated into solar experience. So even though I only have a short amount of time before my interview, since it's tomorrow, I spent about 30 minutes looking all of this information up and taking notes, but I feel way more prepared and ready to speak with Luis.
Thanks, Zara. So after you do a bit of research on the company, and Daryl, can you go back up to slide 26 real quick? Another one of the steps that is helpful is actually taking notes on that job description. So when you screenshotted that job description earlier, it's helpful so that you can go back and start seeing some of the things that they're looking for. It's important to note that on a job description, there are responsibilities and there are qualifications. You want to make sure that you meet the minimum qualifications. You don't need to have already done all of the responsibilities in the past. But it is helpful to go through that job description and start highlighting the things in the job description that you can either give an example of or that you think is interesting, just so that you can start coming up with your examples as you're reading through that are as relevant to this specific job as possible. And then you can highlight things in other colors saying like, oh, I want to ask a question about this. And so you can either print this out or you can do this on Google Docs, but it is helpful to take a really deeper look at that job description before you actually go into that interview. And you can pop down to 29 again. So once you do some of this research on the company, you can start preparing and practicing your actual answers for common interview questions. And so we'll get into some of those common interview questions. You'll also see it in the mock interview. But it is helpful to start going through those and being prepared for what employers frequently ask. There's definitely going to be some unique questions that every employer asks about that specific job. But very commonly for interviews, there are some questions that you can anticipate so that you can actually start practicing them ahead of time. And then when it comes time to practicing those common questions, it's helpful to do it in a few ways. It's nice to practice in front of a mirror. You'd be surprised how just adjusting your posture or adjusting the way that you're reacting to things, so if you're nodding your head or doing different body language, can convey your confidence. And so by being able to see how you look while you are giving your answers can actually give you some immediate feedback of how to appear more confident. And so you could do your confident stance or make sure you're nodding and the like and making that eye contact. So a mirror is a great person to practice with. It's yourself. You could also practice some of the interview questions with a friend if you want to run a couple of your answers by them and they can give you feedback. And a great way to be able to practice is through mock interviews, which we're excited to be able to offer later on today and on the 16th, where you can get direct feedback and go through those common interview questions. In addition to actually speaking out your answers, it's helpful to write down some of your answers ahead of time. And you can even bring bullet point versions to the interview. You can let them know, hey, I've brought some notes. I just want to make sure that I can reference some of the examples of my experience in the past. Do you mind if I use some of my notes that I brought? And you don't want to be like reading directly from any of the notes that you took, but you can have a few bullet points to spark your memories of the experience that you've had. And I like this quote, luck favors the prepared, because oftentimes we feel like people are so lucky. And oftentimes those lucky people are actually the ones that have practiced and prepared for whatever they're working towards. So remember that you can be lucky too if you are focusing on this preparation for your interview. One of the ways that you can enhance the answers to your questions are by using a format. So if we are asked a question in an interview and they say something like, what makes you a good candidate for this position? And you know that teamwork is something that they are looking for because you read it in their job description. They really value teamwork. If you just say, well, I'm a great team player, I have great communication skills, and I always arrive on time, that's a fine answer, but it doesn't really paint a picture in their head of how you present that good teamwork or time management and the like. And so it's actually a stronger answer if you can give an example from your past that is relevant to what you're trying to portray. So for example, you could use this PAR method. And the PAR method stands for problem, action, and results. So let's say I wanted to get across that I was a good team player. And so instead of just saying, well, I'm a good team player, you could say, I think that I would be great for this job because being a team player is a huge value of mine. In fact, I used to be in sports in college, and one of the things that we had to do is we were coming up against a team. I always give sports examples, and I didn't do a ton of sports. So I apologize if some of these examples aren't 100% accurate. But let's say the issue that you face is that you're coming up against a team that is undefeated, and all of your team members were a little bit nervous about going up against this undefeated team. And so your action was that you planned a time to meet up with all of your teammates and put in an extra hour of practice per night for the week. And you were making sure that you motivated the team members through positive reinforcement and encouraging them. And the result were that we felt a lot more prepared when we went up against that team. We still ended up losing, but we felt like we brought the best to the table that we could. And I felt more bonded with my team as a result. And so even if your result wasn't that you won, you could still show that you have brought the team up with you. And so by being able to give an example, you're painting a better picture in the employer's head of how you would add value to their team. And so you'll have the opportunity to write down some PAR examples to some of the common questions after your mock interview itself. And if you have any questions about the PAR method, you're welcome to put them in the chat, or at the end, we'll have some time for questions at the end. So Zara is going to do some practicing for their interview that they have, and give us a little bit of insight of what that was like for them.
In the beginning, it was pretty awkward talking in the mirror and doing a mock interview with my roommate, but it got a little less intimidating the more I practiced. I'd rather be nervous while practicing than during the actual interview. So I made sure to practice a bunch of common interview questions that apply to almost any job. So I'll give you some examples of those.
So there are some things that we can typically expect that an employer is going to ask us. They're going to ask us, why do you want this position? They're going to ask us, what skills can you bring to the team? Oftentimes, if you're going into construction work, they're going to ask you about your ability to work in physically demanding jobs. You're going to be asked about a time when you disagreed with a coworker and how it was resolved, or about a conflict, something around the realms of something wasn't working out right and how was it resolved on your end. And then oftentimes they'll ask something along the lines of, what's a professional weakness of yours, or what is a weakness of yours? So knowing that these are common questions, it gives us time to be able to start writing down some of these examples, either using the PAR method or just recollecting a time from your experience where you can show them that you had positive results that would apply to their team in this role. So let's have Zara show us what their first draft of an answer to a time when they disagreed with a coworker and how it was resolved, and then have them try again and improve on their answer even more, so you can see, okay, it can be an okay answer, but if I start looking at this and start working on it, I can make these answers even better.
Things at the auto body shop got pretty heated. There were some big personalities that, I didn't necessarily agree with all of the time. I'm pretty chill, so I knew how to talk things out. Mostly people just wanted to be heard. Yeah, like I said, I'm pretty easygoing.
So that's not a bad answer. They were given an example where there was a scenario, big personalities, and they were trying to get across that they're easygoing and that people want to be heard. But with a little bit more practice or writing things down, Zara can get more detailed and give a better example for the employer to be able to latch on what those results were.
When I worked at the auto body shop, there were some big personalities I didn't agree with all the time. There was one instance where a coworker blamed me for not being able to find his tools, even though I hadn't moved them. I could tell that he was upset, so I listened to him, agreed that it was frustrating to not find things when you need them, and offered to help find them. And I think because I wasn't super defensive when he was upset, that helped calm him down, and we were able to find his tool bag together.
So that second attempt was better in that it painted a better picture, and it shows how Zara is a little bit more laid back. It shows how Zara was able to listen and work together with that coworker, and wasn't defensive. And so it painted more of a picture of Zara's qualities of a worker coming into work. And how did that feel to go through and do a second round of that, Zara?
The second attempt felt better. I think I still need to go through the rest of these and practice them in front of the mirror, paying attention to my body language and tone, and trying to get specific and relevant examples for all of them.
So if you're doing your mock interview today, you might not already have some of these written down, but this is a great opportunity in your mock interview to have your first drafts and receive feedback so that you can continue improving on what your answers are and continue making them more clear, more concise, and more effective answers. So thank you, Zara, for showing your practicing. So now that you know how to do your research and now that you know how to practice, let's briefly go over just the day of things that you need to know. So bio needs, this is what we like to call just making sure that you have all of the food that you need, that you've eaten ahead of time. Make sure that you're not eating something ahead of time that's going to upset your stomach, but make sure you're also not going into an interview hangry. You'll also want to make sure that all of your bathroom needs are taken care of beforehand as well. It's also nice to have water near you. I'll talk about what to pack on day of, but just make sure that you are taken care of so that you can show up to the interview not distracted. You also want to make sure that you know that early is on time. So online, make sure that you're testing your internet connection ahead of time, your audio, your microphone, your speaker, your headphones at the beginning of the day. And then also check those again 5 to 10 minutes before the interview. And then you want to launch the interview link 5 minutes ahead of time. And if there are any technical issues that you're facing or experiencing and you're having a hard time actually getting into that interview, make sure to email the interviewer immediately to alert them. Don't just start panicking and being like, oh my gosh, I need to get on and this isn't working. Take a minute to email them and say, hey, I'm having some technical difficulties. I'm trying to get in, but the link isn't working. So that they know that you're not just forgetting about the interview. It'd be much better for them to know, oh, I'm having some technical difficulties, than being like, okay, this person's late. That's a much better first impression if you are having those difficulties. For in person, a tip to being able to show up early is if you use the arrive by feature on Google Maps, if you're trying to arrive at a location, let's say your interview was at 10 a.m., you want to arrive early for that so that you can find parking spaces and not have to feel like you're running, so that once you're actually parked, you can find where the actual office interview location is. So you probably want to arrive at least 15 minutes early for in-person interviews. And you can use the arrive by feature on Google Maps to say, I want to arrive at this location by 9:45. It will say, okay, then you need to leave your current location by this time to make it there on time. And usually it factors in the typical traffic for that as well. Make sure that you're also planning for access to transportation. And just in case you are having car difficulty, you have a backup and know what your public transportation options are as well. Dressing for success. You're going to want to make sure that you look neat for an interview. You want to dress for professionalism. Having some sort of button up is always safe. For construction interviews, sometimes people do dress in their construction clothes, though it is typically safer to dress in business professional or at least business casual for your interviews. If you are online, in addition to how you come presenting in your clothes, make sure that your background is also professional. Tell your family or roommates ahead of time so that they can prepare, so they're not walking by or being distracted. You can also add in Zoom backgrounds or whatever platform background so that you block out what's going on behind you as well. And then make sure that you are in as quiet of a place as possible to take any online or phone interviews so that you are not distracted. You also want to make sure, so I have like a window that's in front of me, but if I was facing the other direction, I would end up being completely silhouetted. So you want to make sure that you have some sort of light in front of you and that you are not backlit so that they can actually see your face if you are online. Make sure that you also pack the things that you need for the day, or if you are at home and doing this online, make sure that you have things like a cup of water near you, tissue, paper and pencils so that you can take any notes. And then all of any of the documents that you submitted in front of you to reference. You might not end up referencing your resume and cover letter and job description, but it's nice to have them just in case if you need to spark an example from those. It's also really important to put your phone in do not disturb mode so you don't keep getting the buzzes and pings that can be so distracting for you and the interviewer too. So you don't necessarily need to turn it off. I know that if I put my phone in silent mode that it still buzzes. So it's helpful to put it into the do not disturb mode. So it's game time. It's the day of the interview. Let's go deeper into what to expect for once you're actually at, and I'll hand it over to Daryl.
All right, so as Daisy just mentioned, it's game time. It's time to go. You're actually, it's the day of, it's the morning of the interview. You're heading in right now. It's important to remember before you're going in there, and you remember that, this is a two-way street. You're interviewing them and they're interviewing you. So put yourself in the interviewer's shoes for a second and think about what's important to them. What's really important is that it shows up that you're passionate for their mission, that you're a valuable, talented individual that's going to be a great worker, and let your true personality show through. So remember to, make sure that, you are really taking this opportunity to show exactly who you are and what you bring to the table. Really briefly, we're going to talk through sort of what to expect, a little bit more about the anatomy of an interview. Typically the bulk of the interview is going to be, asking questions, answering questions, you really demonstrating your skills and experiences, your backgrounds, and what you bring to the table by answering those questions the interviewer is asking. But there will be an opening portion. Typically about 5% of the interview will be spent, sharing names, getting settled, welcoming you to the interviewer and making sure that you're ready to go. And then most interviewers like to spend about 10% of the time just really quickly running down the job description, making sure that you have a firm understanding of what the position is that you're there interviewing for, and also going into a little bit of information about the organizational culture. And I mentioned this briefly a second ago. It is that two-way street. You want to make sure that you have a firm understanding of what the organization is, what their company values are, and make sure that it's the right fit for you as well. It is a two-way street. And then after that, reviewing of the job description and getting a better sense of the company culture and the organizational values, we'll move into sort of the biggest part of the interview, which is typically about 75%. And that's taken up by the interviewer asking you questions. And you have that opportunity to not just answer the questions, but also provide those concrete examples using the PAR method of how great you are and everything that you bring to the table. After that portion, which will be the bulk of the interview, there's an opportunity to ask questions. Always have questions prepared. That's a great thing to do. It also allows you to really make sure that you have a firm understanding of the organizational culture, shows that you're prepared, and makes them feel like, you know, they should be investing in you, right? That you're taking the time to really vet them as well, and that you are somebody that they want on their team. And then every interview wraps up with about 5% of the time talking about the timeline for hiring, what the next steps might be, and it's really wrapping up and closing out the interview. So we'll go back to Luis and Zara and hear a little bit more about what an interview might look like.
Hi, Zara.
Hi, Luis. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can. And on your end, can you hear me okay?
I can.
Great. Thanks for taking the time to meet with me over Zoom. Do you have any questions for me before we get started?
I don't have any logistics questions right now, and I'll save my questions for the end in case we cover them during the rest of the interview.
Okay, let's get started with questions. First of all, I see from your resume that you have worked in construction. What is your solar installation experience?
I got my experience with solar while working for a contractor that had an off-grid solar site. And she had me help out because I had taken a 9-month green building training in San Jose. I had the opportunity to do some operations and maintenance of the system as well, and replaced a few modules too. My experience is mostly in general construction, and it really seemed to help me while I was out there. I have had to go on roofs to clear out gutters before, so I know that I'm not afraid of heights either. After training with that solar project and the green construction training, I got really interested in wanting to work in installation full-time at an institution that has opportunities for growth.
That sounds good, thank you. Zara, can you describe a time when you faced a challenge or made a mistake on the job?
Of course, there's a lot to learn from mistakes. In my last job at the Keep Biosphere, one of the projects I worked on was building a patio. I had never installed one that big before and didn't know about the angle you had to drop so the water flows to the low point. The other person I was working with didn't know about it either. And so when the super came to check it out, it had been done incorrectly. We had to redo half the patio again, and it took a while because the stones were heavy and we had to re-level the gravel underneath. I definitely learned about asking clarifying questions during that day. And now I try to make sure that I understand all the requirements before starting a job.
Okay, thank you for telling me that experience. We anticipate people making mistakes, especially when they're new, but we try and make sure that you work closely with someone who is more experienced than you are in the beginning. On that note, we don't automatically disinclude folks with criminal histories, but we work on a lot of residential properties, properties, and we can't hire people with certain convictions. Do you have any records that might turn up in a background check?
Well, I believe that with the Fair Chance Act, it isn't actually allowed for an employer to ask that question during an interview. I don't feel particularly comfortable answering that question directly, but I suppose I might as well just get it all out in the open. I have had a charge against me for petty theft from a few years ago. However, I have been employed since then and have turned my situation around, and I'm no longer in that situation that I was during that time. I've worked with case managers at the job training organization I went through who can vouch for me, as well as employers since my conviction. My job training completion and my consistent employment and no further entanglements with the law since, I hope shows my motivations and my skills.
Thank you for sharing that with me. I think that your work history shows your track record, and thank you for letting me know your understanding of the Fair Chance Act. That brings us to the end of the questions I have for you. Do you have any questions for me?
Sure. Yes, I have a few if we have the time. Do you provide all the necessary tools and safety equipment for installations?
We provide all the tools and equipment you'll need on site, but you'll need to bring your own boots and a mask, of course.
Awesome. How has COVID impacted your company's work?
We did slow down for a bit, but now we have implemented COVID safety protocols and our crews are safely back at work.
Great. So I guess my last question is about next steps. And when do you anticipate letting me know about a decision for my candidacy?
We're interviewing people all week and we will give you a call next week with our decision.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to get to know me. It was great to learn more about your company and the team. I'm excited to have the chance to work as a solar installer and to be part of the Center Solar family.
Thank you, Sarah. We will reach out soon either way. Thanks for speaking with me on such a short notice too.
Thanks, take care.
Thank you, Zara and Luis, for that interaction of an interview. Applause, applause. So let's go through a few of the reflections with Luis about how that interview went and figure out what went well and why. So Luis, what went well about that interview with Zara?
Well, I like that Zara gave me relevant information and sounded very professional.
Have you had interviews with people who didn't sound particularly professional? And can you give an example of an answer that wouldn't sound as professional?
Sure. While Zara doesn't have a lot of solar experience, they were able to give examples of how their experience was relevant. I've heard people saying things like these before. I applied to a bunch of other solar positions, but I didn't get any calls back, probably because they don't think I have enough experience since I haven't done many residential or commercial projects. I mean, really, I've done only one, but I think I could pick it up pretty easily.
Yeah, I actually have heard a lot of people give answers like that before, where they really downplay what their experience is. Sometimes people also get really personal or let the employer in on the secret that you're nervous about whether or not you qualify. So it's totally normal to have these thoughts, like the example Luis just gave of, I don't have enough experience. I haven't done a ton of commercial projects. I've only done one. And it's normal to have that, but it's not something you totally want to share with a hiring manager. And I don't know if any of you caught that in Zara's interview, because Zara did focus on all of the examples of experience that they do have, rather than, oh, I only have this one solar experience. It really sounded more like Zara was professional and prepared for this role because they were talking about their construction experience, their training, the time that they were out on some of these other construction sites. So it made it sound a little bit more like, oh yeah, I'm confident and qualified for this role, to actually go out on this job, rather than saying like, I don't know, I've only done this one thing, and really focusing on that. One of the other things that I also want to bring up for this interview is, in some of our past workshops, in the resume workshop, people were asking for interviews. How do I answer these questions that come up about criminal backgrounds? And so we did speak with an organization, a lawyer at Root and Rebound, and we were asking them more about the Fair Chance Hiring Act. And so we gave this example of how somebody could respond if they are asked that in an interview. And in California, the truth is they're not supposed to ask you about that in the interviewing process. It might come up when you go through the background checks. They are allowed to do background checks, but it shouldn't come up in that interview process. So you are allowed to say, you know, based on the Fair Chance Hiring Act, I don't feel comfortable answering that question. And Zara could have left it at that. But you are put in kind of that awkward scenario. And so we did want to give you an example of how to address that. And so it doesn't feel like it's just stopping that interview. And so Zara gave that example of, okay, well, I'm not totally comfortable. You should know that this isn't allowed. I'm going to answer this. We should have this on the table. I do have a criminal record. You might see this, but I was able to go through this training process. People can vouch for me. I have had employment. I don't need to be in that scenario anymore. And so it was kind of a combination of, hey, you shouldn't be asking this, and hey, I'm prepared and I'm ready to show up at work for you. And if you do have additional questions specifically related to that, feel free to email us at that workforce@calsoma.org. And we're happy to connect you with the website for Root and Rebound and the resources that they have there, and happy to continue discussing from our understanding as well for how to get more in depth with that. Because I do know so many people feel like they've just been stopped in the middle of an interview and heartbroken because they feel like all of a sudden they're not going to get the job because of that question. So Zara, thank you for giving that example of how somebody could answer for that. So Zara gave really great examples using the PAR method, and all of us can continue to practice and even improve on those. But Zara did a great job of saying, okay, here's the scenario, here's what I learned, including in that question of when did you make a mistake. They talked about their results where, well, now